This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. I'm here with Lara Giddings at the 2017 UIC conference. Lara is the former Premier of Tasmania and the Shadow Attorney General. I've got to get that right. Now, Lara, please tell me, what is your interest in medical cannabis first?
Well, as a politician, you often meet the families, the patients who are advocating for change. And that's certainly what has happened in Tasmania. We've had some brave people come forward and admit that they are breaking the law in order to be able to provide what they consider life-saving medicine to their children. So our role as a politician is really looking at what legal framework is in place and how that needs to be addressed in order to make medicinal cannabis accessible to the right people at the right time.
I've got to ask a difficult question, and I guess it comes from the people who have been tarred with a brush, the politicians that have been tarred with a brush saying you're bad because of standing up for a right, and then they get sucked into the machine. What happens? like how hard is it for a politician to make a stance, even though it might be against their party, to say this is the right thing to do? What happens with that machination?
It is a really difficult role for politicians, and while I think it's been too slow, the progress on medicinal cannabis, I do also understand why some of that has happened as well. That members of Parliament get advice, and they get advice mostly in these areas around medicine from the medical community and from their bureaucracy, their bureaucrats as well if they're a minister, who also get advice from the medical community. And the reality is, as we've even seen today at this symposium, there is a split within the medical community. There are some people, some doctors, who are willing to be progressive and to take the risks of taking on a drug that doesn't necessarily have all the clinical trials behind them. Most doctors are much more conservative about that, and they're the people giving advice to the health minister of the day. So I am frustrated at the lack of progress in Tasmania. I'm frustrated at, while there's been progress at the federal level, there's a lot of red tape that's still in place. But it's also difficult for a minister of the day who's receiving advice from one sector saying you've got to do something, it's urgent, it's making a big difference, and another sector saying you mustn't do anything, we don't have all the clinical evidence in place, you don't know what Pandora's box you're going to open up if you make this accessible easily. So for a minister or a politician, it's very difficult to make those decisions. But we have seen some courageous people. We did see Mike Baird, the Premier of New South Wales, the Victorian Premier here, Daniel Andrews, really pick up the cudgel in that respect and create change more quickly. In Tasmania, I have to say, we've been much, much slower, and that's why I'm involved, because I feel we need advocates within politics, within the community, within the medical profession to keep the pressure up.
Okay, so I was speaking with Associate Professor David Caldecott, who's a larrikin but a very responsible one. And he says a lot of these doctors that are taking a stand, right or wrong, are ignorant. Whether they're pro or against the medical use of cannabis, they're ignorant. So why are the ministers choosing those who are ignorant rather than those who are educated about the medicinal use of cannabis?
It's a problem because you've got institutions that are in place. So for a federal minister of health, they have the Therapeutic Goods Association already there in place, the body you go to for certain advice. They've got the Office of Drug Control, the other body that they go to for advice. Yeah. The problem is that advice is where the conservatism is. There are great people like Dr. David Caldecott out there in the community who are highly specialised in their field, who understand the medicines much better than anyone else, but they are also hitting their head against a brick wall when it comes to those entrenched institutions. So how you get change is through these sorts of symposiums where you do bring people from across the world, and there's been some incredible speakers here from Israel and the US who are involved in research, involved in trials, or have been treating patients for many years as well. So I hope, and I would hope that we had federal bureaucrats here listening to the symposium.
That was my next question.
And
why aren't they here?
Yes, and they should be here. That's the reality of it. They should be here. But I hope that we do get progress, and I'm positive that we will. But we do need a lot more action.
So given that the wheels of politics turn slowly, and that there are different parties, different factions involved. What's your guesstimate?
Well, I don't know. I'm hoping in Tasmania, where I do know more than anywhere, that there might be a change of government in March of next year, and that my Labor colleagues are a lot more forward-thinking in this area, and we're developing our policies around this, and I'm a key part of that development of policy, which I hope will help to drive the agenda forward in Tasmania. Right now, what the government is going to put in place is a special access scheme, which means that patients can access medicinal cannabis, but only if they go through a specialist and only have it administered administered by a specialist, but actually dispensed by a pharmacy within a hospital. So it's so confined, so narrow, it's going to be very difficult for patients to get access to it, particularly considering the waiting list that's already in place for specialists.
Yeah.
So I'm quite concerned about that aspect of it. I would hope that a future Labor government would relax some of those very tight controls.
Okay, so why would anybody, given that anybody can see, any patient can see, I can see as a nurse, that wouldn't be a reasonable thing for many people to access if they were having epileptic fits at home in the middle of the night on Sunday, if they were having rheumatoid arthritis and they couldn't get to the hospital because they can't drive. So there's so many issues of access. It seems to be this issue of access, again and again. If that's just such a no-brainer as to think about it, why do people suggest these things? I don't get it. I don't understand as a human why somebody would propose that sort of mechanism as a reasonable thing.
I share your frustration, and I am certainly concerned, or I believe the other thing that as a politician we can do is address that issue of the decriminalisation of medicinal cannabis, so that we can get this issue outside of the legal law courts framework or the criminal framework. But when it comes to the medical framework, we're so reliant on our medical fraternity. I mean, they are critical to these roles, and I end up confused too as to where we sit. The medical fraternity is divided on this issue.
Absolutely.
It is divided. So how you as a Member of Parliament work your way through that and still be confident that you've got the right treatment being provided for a patient, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy at
one
all.
of the best things I think David Caldecott said to me just before was, it's got to do with duty of care. Is that you have a duty of care to know about it.
Yes.
And the purpose of the course that he's set up, which is actually in the free commons, so that nobody can make money out of it, is that you can go in there and learn about cannabis with the precept of not wanting to prescribe it in the end, of arriving at the conclusion that you are not going to prescribe it. So the whole thing is not about cajoling you into being this cannabis convert. It's all about the medical choice, the responsible choice of a medico to then offer an appropriate treatment.
And I think what we also have to highlight to the medico world in that sense is that what they're doing for patients today, for the vast majority of their patients, is the right thing. So we heard today in there the statistics of about 70% of epileptic children are quite adequately catered for under the current system.
Yeah.
So they need to be told you're doing the right thing there. But what we're concerned about is the other 30% who are not getting the relief and the treatment that they deserve through the mainstream system. And to get people to shift their thinking to the 30% is not easy to do.
Okay, so change in politics. Now, been speaking about it this morning, about that it takes one, and then another one, and then another one. Just how much difference can one person make? And who to? Do they go to their local member? Which political member do they approach?
I think an individual can be very powerful, and in fact, as you've seen, Dan Haslam as an individual and Lucy have made a huge impact on this issue. In Tasmania, Nicole Cowles, talking about her daughter Alice, has had a significant impact on the issue in Tasmania. One individual can change the world. Now that those stories have actually shifted the political field a long way, we have actually come a long way politically in the last 3 years. But what we now need is for those patients who have tried to work through the system and have failed for various reasons, they're the ones we need to hear from now. Those are the people we need to turn up on their local member doorstep
So
and
that's
say,
the appropriate
that's the
politician.
appropriate politician in the first instance, turn up and say, Lara, I have tried to go through the system, I have failed for these reasons, I believe the system is too tight or it's not working properly, can you please raise these issues with your health minister of the day and try to change it. If that doesn't work at that level, then keep going up the scale. Go to the health minister, go to the premier, go to the prime minister, whoever it may well be.
And what's the reasonable access to, like, me getting access to the health minister
Well,
today?
your local member, you should get the face-to-face.
Right.
You should get a face-to-face, and that's where the most powerful story comes from. When you look at someone in the eye and you tell them your story, it's much harder to deny. As you go up the chain, it gets harder to have that face-to-face, which is why I'd recommend you start with your local member. Get them on side to be your advocate within their party, so that you know when they have a discussion about medicinal cannabis, there is someone speaking up for you in that room.
I have to ask this question about politicians in general being tarred with the same brush, and that is, politicians are famed for feathering their own nests. How does one individual make that politician listen to them rather than the political agenda of you're going to be good for me? Do you know that?
Well, I think
cynical.
We've already seen that though, Andrew, in that it has very visually been seen. It was Lucy talking to Mike Baird. It was a family here in Victoria talking directly with Daniel Andrews that shifted the agenda in a massive way.
Right.
So that personal story is extremely powerful, but you also have to be careful that one person's experience may not be true of the entire experience on any issue. So as a politician, you go away and seek out further information and you seek expert advice as well.
But unfortunately, the expert advice isn't necessarily educated, so it's like...
Well, or it can be educated, but it's in a very conservative way. So it is it's a difficult one. It's very easy to just say all politicians are rotten and all politicians are in for self-interest. I've not actually experienced that in my time.
Okay.
And I've been involved in politics for 22 years and I've worked through COAG as Premier at the federal level as well as obviously at the state level. Most politicians want to make a difference. They want to be positive. They want to help people. And again, that's why I say the powerful message comes out of a personal story.
Thank you so much for joining us on FX Medicine.
Thank you.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook.